Greg, and then we'll take some from you all too. So, okay, so again, as we mentioned, there's index cards around, so if you have a question for Greg, write your name, contact information, and question on it, and slide it to the end. Sally will pick them up over here, slide them to the end over there, Andrea will grab them over there. Okay, Greg, one of the things I think you are known for on Cincinnati City Council is your ability to work across lines of difference, right? To bring people together who don't always share the same ideas and opinions and get some work done. From what we see in news coverage.
How's that going?
House seems like a difficult place, some pretty extreme views happening. So do you see possibilities for using this skill you have to bring people together to get real work done? And what does that look like in such a divided Congress?
Great question. Let me touch on the importance of this, because I think I talked about sort of policy-wise, the way I think of things. I think about it in the context of brain development, okay? So housing policy and education policy and healthcare policy, because the brain is the most powerful thing, and it's what really unlocks the potential of a person, of a child. But in terms of the how, my approach has always been get the people who are in the best position to make change in a room. And that's going to most likely be people who don't agree, right? Some of the, because if you put everyone in the room that agrees, like, you're missing a lot of people, and you're probably not going to get the change. So on eviction prevention, for example, obviously we wanted to make it, easier for children and families to stay in their homes. So it was on the tenant side, right? But guess who you need in the room if you're going to make real change for tenants? Landlords. Right. Hey, all right. So we built a collaborative, a coalition of tenants, tenant advocates, and landlords to go through all of the things that were leading to evictions and how to collectively prevent that. What policy would make sense? Because if we just pass policy that we thought made sense and the landlord said, there's no way I can make that work, then what did we do? And we ultimately, and if they weren't in the room, if you're not in the room, this is just like human nature. If you got left out, you're most likely going to reject anything that emerges. You're just going to be like, hey, you didn't include me, so I'm not going to participate. And a lot of in the work of eviction prevention, we needed landlords to participate. So I'm a big believer in bringing all of the people and during the preschool promise, and Elisa was one of the people in this room. We locked towards the end. We had to get it done, and it was the 11th hour, and there were still disagreements about how it was going to work and who's going to pay for what, and yada yada yada. Anyway, we literally locked 15 of us in a room for several days. I mean, we left. We didn't sleep in the room, but we came, until we got an agreement. And I'm a big believer that is at the heart of getting things done. Now, the United States Congress, it's bigger, right? I mean, there's and the people are. There's just some really extreme is not, it feels like an overused word and doesn't quite capture how awful some of these folks are. Matt Gaetz, obviously, is the one who sort of just decided he was going to break government last week, and although, for those of you who are, does everyone know what I'm talking about? Everyone know what happened last week? Okay, so last week, thank you. Last week, so at the beginning of beginning of every Congress, so we elect a Congress every 2 years. At the beginning of every Congress, you have to pick a speaker, and then you have to pass rules, and that they happen almost simultaneously. You pick a speaker, next vote is on the rules. And in order to become speaker, Kevin McCarthy felt like he had to keep making concessions to people on the far right. who didn't want him to be Speaker. And one of the most dangerous concessions he made was that he was going to change the rule to allow any one of them to remove him, to call for a vote to oust him as Speaker, called the motion to vacate, vacating the chair of the Speaker. And we all said, that's a terrible idea, don't do that. And McCarthy did it anyways, and the guy who was the holdout, who demanded that only one member of Congress could vacate the chair, Matt Gaetz, he ended up not voting for the Speaker anyways. So the Speaker won by a very small margin. This is Kevin McCarthy. And all of us as Democrats, I'm a Democrat, we voted against the rule. Terrible rule. It is going to mean that because one of these folks on the far, far right has the ability to start the process to fire the Speaker, that they have all of this power and control. And for the first 8-9 months, I have been voting on so many Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz amendments. I mean, hundreds at this point. These are look, Democrats have people on the far left, but these folks are they're extremists. And they, and for somebody like a Matt Gaetz, they really just want to burn the whole thing down. They just, particularly because they want to get on TV. There's this awful thing in national politics right now where the more chaos and conflict you can create, the more popular you can become. Horrible. Anyway, he calls for the motion to vacate. Several of us, getting to the question, several of us who are in a group called the Problem Solvers Caucus, it's 30 Democrats, 30 Republicans, we sort of hold the center. Some of us are very progressive, some of us are more moderate, but we're people who want to be working on solving problems. And I consider myself to be more progressive, though a lot of people think of me as a moderate because I'm always in these rooms where people are trying to just sort out something as opposed to lobbying opinions. And so we spent several days leading up to this vote trying to get an agreement where Democrats could work with the Speaker either to just not vote or potentially vote for him or against the motion to vacate. And one of the things that we asked for was one of the only things, it was to help him, was to get rid of this rule. So, in the past, it takes a majority of people to call for a motion to vacate. And that meant that, the extremists weren't in charge. He didn't want to do it. And it was really frustrating, and we worked through most of the weekend, and then on Monday, I thought maybe Monday night we were close, and then he just didn't want to do it. He didn't want to work with us. He didn't want to change the rule, and the vote happened on Tuesday, and the Speaker was ousted, and then we thought, well, he's going to try it again, and now he'll come back and work with us because we have a set of, very commonsensical sort of approaches to bipartisanship. He'll come and work with us, and he went on TV and said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to cave to Democrats. And it was like, we're just trying to update the rules. And I'm also not going to run for Speaker anymore. And we thought we were going to come back and vote on Speaker, keep voting again like we did in January. But anyway, now I'm here because they're going to start all over. And guess who's coming into town? I'm sorry, I know the questions about bipartisanship. It's just every sort of facet of this story gets crazier and crazier. They're going to meet on Tuesday to pick a new leader, and we have laid out again all of the things like, we want to work with you. We want to be bipartisan. Not everyone in the Democratic caucus, but there's a big group of us. And we have support from leadership to say, yeah, go for it. See if you can, we want to govern. We want to govern. And, because I've built a good relationship with a lot of these folks, whether it's been through travel or just on the floor, you go and you spend time with people and they're not, it's not the Matt Gaetzes of the world, but a lot of these Republicans, I will go and I try to spend as much time as I can. So they're like, oh, I like Greg. Let's get Greg in this conversation. And so on Monday night, I got a call from one of a member of Congress who's closest to McCarthy. He's one of his best friends. And I thought we were close. And I said, hey, this is it. We just want some rule changes. And I thought he was calling to say, we're good. And he called and said, okay, well, I'll pass it along. They just weren't interested. In any event, on Tuesday, anyone know who's coming to D.C., back to the Capitol, by the way, back to the United States Capitol to help the Republicans pick a speaker? Donald Trump. By the way, Leslie, I was thinking on the car ride over here, I'm not sure why we're letting him onto the property. I feel like that's something we should be saying. Okay. He tried to overthrow the government. Sorry, that's not any... We're just in this very crazy time. I just want you to know, to the point, one, it's hugely important to be, despite all of this craziness, and everyone sort of like, you can do one of two things. You can sort of just go pick a side and go to war, or go stand in the middle and try to get it done. Try to resolve this particular issue. I am in the middle, talking to folks on both sides, trying to see if we can't get to an agreement on how to govern in a bipartisan way to help the next speaker so that we are getting things done, starting with the budget.
Thank you. My next question won't be so much about the downfall of democracy, I promise. Okay. And I do want to highlight, though, one of the really important things Greg is saying over and over is something we talk about at school board school a lot, is that's relationships are the work. So just want to highlight that. Like, you don't get anything done on your own. You don't get anything done when you're legislating by taking your megaphone and just standing to the side and yelling about it. You build relationships and you figure out, how can we use these relationships? Where do we have something in common to get the work done? So my next question. All right, so one of the things that we know school boards, administrators around the country were so grateful for were the ESSER dollars. So for those of you who don't know, the ESSER funding was that huge influx of post-COVID money to help school districts recover from everything that happened with COVID. So I think every district's incredibly grateful for that, but we also know that just because the pandemic's over doesn't mean the impacts of the pandemic are behind us. And so in districts like Cincinnati Public, we've got kids and teachers and staff working so hard to make up the lost academic ground. Around the country, we've got kids with mental health crises coming out of this pandemic. And so I think we're all aware that the impacts of the pandemic are probably generational. We're probably going to be dealing with this for a generation, but ESSER funding expires next year. So, is there any chance of getting more federal funding? Or do you have any advice for a room full of advocates about how they could talk to their legislators and get this raised at the federal level?
You can clap. You guys haven't clapped in a while. I always get nervous when a crowd hasn't clapped in a while. Anyway, yeah, so on the relationship piece, one thing I would, it really is the most important thing. I mean, I during the preschool promise, there was like 15 people that every time I had like a consequential, important discussion, I would call those 15 people, make sure that they were up to speed. And when I leave a meeting or if I have a gap in my schedule, I always think to myself, who should I check in on? Who haven't I not checked in on in a while that I probably need to check in? When I walk onto the House floor, I think to myself, oh, who am I checking in on? Who am I going to go connect with? Because you just want to keep all of those relationships not just strong, but like really meaningful. Does that make sense? Like, it's not just a casual, but like, you develop trust, and then people want to work with you, and that's how you get things done. In any event, or that's my philosophy. On the ESSER funding, I mean, the budget in general is in limbo until we get a speaker. And then we've just got to pass a budget. We had a bipartisan budget agreement that passed the House, it passed the Senate. We got to go back to that. That will keep everything at this year's level, which is, I think, the best we can do considering we have a divided Congress. The Republicans control the House and Democrats control the Senate. Democrats have the White House. So, keeping everything at this year's, that has been a challenge because everybody on the other side wants to make massive cuts. And so we are trying to hold the line to keep everything at this year's spending levels. In terms of how to advocate, my advice is to be in constant communication with your representative, whether it's me or somebody else. Just the fact that you send us stuff helps because we do talk about it, and we publish those numbers, how many people wrote in about this or that. But you can also call other members and write letters to other members, email. So many of these members are on Twitter, and so you can tweet at them, It is the benefit of Twitter, maybe the only one. And so, figuring out a way to say, hey, just reopen the government, pass a budget, and, the education funding has got to be at the top of the list. Now, what you're going to hear, I feel like I'm preaching. You all know this. As you know, what you hear is, well, the budget's so difficult and we're running these deficits and we can't really keep spending. And it's like, yeah, okay. Yes. What I've said, and I believe very strongly, for what it's worth, is we can't keep spending trillions and trillions of dollars on tax cuts for the super wealthy. Because that is, every time we do this, these tax breaks or loopholes or whatever it is, that is spending. We've called them cuts or things that sound better, but that is spending. You are spending on billionaires, millionaires, and billionaires. Stop that. And there's other spending that goes to people who don't need it, right? Stop that. Now you have plenty of money, more than enough to invest in classrooms. To me, that's what people have to hear. Stop spending money on millionaires and billionaires and the people who don't need it. Spend money on our kids.
Yes, we should applaud for that one. All right, I have one more question, then I got a pocket full of questions from you all. So, all right, Greg, I know you are working on so much that's going to impact students, everything from mental health care to stricter gun control laws. And so if you had to prioritize getting one thing done that you think would have the biggest impact on the ground for the kids you represent, what would that be, and how likely is it for it to happen?
Well, I'll start with the second part. I think it's highly likely, right? Like, don't do anything, right, unless you think it's really likely. So I'm one of those, like, hey, let's just be optimistic. Let's just be hopeful and optimistic and keep going. And so whatever it is, I'm very optimistic. That's a great question. I think probably the income piece. I believe so strongly in investing in schools and teachers, childcare, preschool, prenatal care, housing, and it's also true that income matters. It just matters. Your ability to pay for stuff matters, and if you can pay for all of the things that you need, healthcare and housing and food and the extra expenses related to school and activities, and you don't have to you can do that in one job. You don't have to have multiple jobs so that you can spend time with your children. and you can be a part of their lives, that's probably the most transformative thing. And so getting incomes up. Everyone works. There are very few people who don't work. So this idea that we don't live in a time anymore where, you have all these people who, I'm not sure we ever did, but people are working, and they're working hard, harder than they've ever worked, and they're working more jobs than people used to, and they're not making what they need to pay all their bills. And so I think probably whether it's ultimately still called the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is a terrible name, or something else, I think that piece of legislation that we're working on would be the most transformative. It would be a vehicle for universal basic income, meaning that if you're working and you have kids, or quite frankly, this would be across the board, because so many of these folks have kids, they're just not living with their kid, and we want them to be successful too so they can spend more time with their child, mostly dads, is if you're making, you gotta be making this. Let's say you have to be making this in order to pay all your bills and spend time with your kids. Not a lot to ask for. And you're working 40, 50 hours a week. But right now, your job pays you here. We should fill that gap. Not forever, but until the market gets to a place where they are paying people. People talk about a living wage. I know what that means, but in the event that folks don't, it's a wage that allows you to pay all your bills and spend time with your family, right? So that to me would be the most transformative, because that would fundamentally change outcomes for children and families.
All right, we got time for a couple questions from the group here. First one, how does the Ohio delegation to Congress collaborate? Do they collaborate for Ohio's K-12 system? And are there any ways that people in this room can help create accountability or lobby towards that delegation? So how do you all work together?
I love this question. Whose question was this? Thank you. What's your name? Lisa. Right. Good question. This is actually, I think, the way to advocate. Let's focus on the whole delegation, because when we are asked as a delegation to do something, that's a little bit of a different ask, and most of us are very eager to say yes because we like Ohio. I don't know. There's something about Ohioans we're pro-Ohio. I don't know what. But so when there was the train derailment in East Palestine, we all immediately started working together. There's 15 members of Congress, 15 members of the House, two United States. It's just 17 of us. And we signed on to a bunch of things to the administration to really expedite stuff that the EPA and others should have been doing when it happened. So I think pushing. So we do like each other. There's one member of the Ohio delegation that doesn't hang out with us as much as everyone else. He may be the speaker. But the rest of us hang out and we get along. So I like that idea of focusing advocacy on the Ohio delegation. Because there's 10 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and then in the Senate it's 1 and 1, right? So great bipartisan group, and we do want to work together, and I think doing it around children and education makes all the sense in the world. So I like that strategy, and we would love to work with you on that. So if you guys have things that you want to do, we'll ask the Ohio delegation to sign on to something, to send, what they're called a dear colleague, which is hey, everybody else in Congress, everybody in Ohio would like you to know that we want this to happen. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, cool.
Okay, so this next one's kind of along the same lines, and it's around how do we support the things that you are doing? And so I know you said you can call your congresspeople, but are there other things that, again, this room full of people should be writing down of actions they should take? And then I think the other part of this, One of the things we talked about at the state level is it feels like it's like, oh my God, I got to be tracking this stuff constantly or I miss something. Like, where should people be looking to even know, oh, these are the things Greg's working on, these are priorities? How should they know that? And then how can they support the things that you're doing?
That's a great question. Okay, so we have a newsletter. If you go to the website, I don't even know what the website is, but if it's just you Google Greg Landsman Congress, I guess. Whatever. Sorry, I really want to do stand-up in my next life. And I think I have a good bit about just Google. Like, I think everyone has a good bit about Google, but just like how easy it is to find. It's just funny when people ask questions like, God, I wish I knew this. It's like, did you try Google? You know? All right, anyway, that's all. It's just funny. Yeah, so you can sign up for the newsletter. We do town halls every couple of weeks. We do an in-person town hall every month. I'll leave from here. I don't think I'll get to keep my hoodie on, but we have a town hall in Norwood at noon today. You can sign up for the newsletter and get that information. If you follow us on Instagram, and it's just at Greg Landsman, Twitter, we post all of everything that we're doing. So the votes that I take, I do a quick video, and I explain the vote for transparency purposes. And so I think that is a good way I would do that for other members of the Ohio delegation. And then, I mean, the state level, you know, typically the minority and the majority leaders, the speaker, those are people that if you can follow on social media, you can keep up with a lot of this stuff. The most important thing, I think, ultimately, is to leverage your networks. Everyone has a network of people. And so I think I would just encourage you to, you know, make a list of everybody in your network, your friends, your family, your coworkers, people that you can start to engage and bring into these conversations is the most important thing that I think you can do to help build power around the things that you care about. I mean, if you go to vote and it's you, that's one vote. It's good. If you go to vote and you have organized, you know, 50 people, that's more power. One of my favorite people in Cincinnati, I went to see him this week, and he reminded me, as he always does, I don't know why he does this, he said, you know, I still can mobilize almost 1,500 voters down here. That's a really powerful statement. I can mobilize 1,500 voters. And I don't know, it doesn't have to be 1,500. It can be 15, it can be 50, it can be 100, but that makes a huge difference, not just to vote, but to be part of these things. And that means that that's one, you know, place where you have enormous power and can act immediately. And that does help. I mean, because we share values. We care about the same things. We may not agree on everything, but, you know, at the heart of what we care about is people getting engaged, participate, vote. And, you know, that makes all the difference in the world.
We've got time for one more question here. Okay, so this one again is kind of about the how. Like, how does change happen at the federal level? So you told us about the committee you're on and why that one is so important. You told us about reaching out to the Ohio delegation, Congress. So this question is around, what are the congressional committees or lobbying orgs or even nonprofits that you align with or you suggest this group aligns with in the pursuit of systemic education change?
Yeah, at the federal level, there's the two committees that I've been focused on, education and labor. That's one committee. That would have been the committee I would have probably done three: small business, veterans, but also education and labor. Unfortunately, when they organized at the beginning of the year, the party in power, in this case, the Republicans, they get to choose their committee assignments first, and then you get a list. And then based on the ratio, it determines how many slots, openings there are. Nobody signed up on their side for education and labor. Just facts. So there were no openings. Bless you. No openings. Guess what the number one committee in terms of openings was? This is like so inside baseball. But there were 0 openings for education and labor, 20 openings for oversight, which is the committee that's investigating things. You know, they're like, well, you can go on oversight. It's, good for TV. I was like, no, I don't want to do that. So education and labor is that's where a lot of the policy happens, right? But appropriations, and there's 12 subcommittees on appropriations, and those subcommittees produce the 12 spending bills. You'll hear about the 12 spending bills again, because we start back hopefully next week. One of those subcommittees is education and labor. That's where I want to be. That is where all of the things that we care about either get funded or don't get funded. And so knowing those folks and working with us, I mean, this is a really powerful group. We would love to be part of, engaging that group. And quite frankly, having them, somebody or folks from that committee and or staff talk to you all is something that we can organize. Not just once, but on a regular basis, so that you're connected directly with the people who are appropriating the education, child, advocacy-related dollars.